Okay, everyone, we're going to start up with 171.0.6.
By this time someone had carried word of this conference to Peter and the other apostles, and they were highly indignant that James and John would seek to be preferred before them, and that they would secretly go with their mother to make such a request. When they fell to arguing among themselves, Jesus called them all together and said, "You well understand how the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over their subjects, and how those who are great exercise authority. But it shall not be so in the kingdom of heaven. Whosoever would be great among you, let him first become your servant. He who would be first in the kingdom, let him become your minister. I declare to you that the Son of Man came not to be ministered to, but to minister. And I now go up to Jerusalem to lay down my life in the doing of the Father's will, and in the service of my brethren." When the apostles heard these words, they withdrew by themselves to pray. That evening, in response to the labors of Peter, James and John made suitable apologies to the 10 and were restored to the good graces of their brethren.
Okay, so obviously everyone was put out that James and John had the audacity to go ask Jesus of something that would give them preferential treatment. And Jesus just let them know after they argued for a bit that he who is the greatest must be the servant of all, and you must be a minister in order for your brethren to trust you. And that's what it is. In order for anyone to give leadership to another, or at least counselship, or the ability to guide another, they have to trust that person. And the best way and the fastest way to show that you are trustworthy of their trust is to be their servant, is to do good to them, to show that you are a minister to them first, that you will put your own needs not first, but their needs first and your needs later.
In asking for places on the right hand and on the left hand of Jesus at Jerusalem, the sons of Zebedee little realized that in less than 1 month their beloved teacher would be hanging on a Roman cross, with a dying thief on one side and another transgressor on the other side. And their mother, who was present at the crucifixion, well remembered the foolish request she had made of Jesus at Pella regarding the honor she so unwisely sought for her apostle sons.
So she didn't realize the spiritual significance of what she was asking, but she did get a taste or a small answer to the folly of her request. Because I'm sure as she saw Christ hanging from the cross, I thought to ask Jesus that my sons would be on his left hand and his right hand. Wow, I'm glad he didn't give me that request because they'd be hanging up there with him. I'm sure it struck her profoundly and changed her life in a variety of ways for the better.
1. The departure from Pella. On the forenoon of Monday, March 13, Jesus and his 12 apostles took final leave of the Pella encampment, starting south on their tour of the cities of southern Perea, where Abner's associates were at work. They spent more than 2 weeks visiting among the 70, and then went directly to Jerusalem for the Passover. When the Master left Pella, the disciples encamped with the apostles, about 1,000 in number, followed after him. About one-half of this group left him at the Jordan ford on the road to Jericho when they learned he was going over to Heshbon, and after he had preached the sermon on counting the cost. They went on up to Jerusalem, while the other half followed him for 2 weeks, visiting the towns in southern Perea. In a general way, most of Jesus' immediate followers understood that the camp at Pella had been abandoned, but they really thought this indicated that their Master at last intended to go to Jerusalem and lay claim to David's throne. A large majority of his followers never were able to grasp any other concept of the kingdom of heaven. No matter what he taught them, they would not give up this Jewish idea of the kingdom. Acting on the instruction.
Okay, so once again, no matter what he told them or how clearly he stated, and it is remarkable that Christ clearly stated his intent. He never beat around the bush. He never said things that, well, may or may not come about or something like that. It was always clear. And they just didn't believe him because they always applied their own desires, their own will to see how things would turn out to what he was saying and what was happening. They did that time and time again. And I think many times we do as well.
Instructions of the Apostle Andrew, David Zebedee closed the visitors' camp at Pella on Wednesday, March 15th. At this time, almost 4,000 visitors were in residence, and this does not include the 1,000 and more persons who sojourned with the apostles at what was known as the Teachers' Camp, and who went south with Jesus and the 12. Much as David disliked to do it, he sold the entire equipment to numerous buyers and proceeded with the funds to Jerusalem, subsequently turning the money over to Judas Iscariot. David was present in Jerusalem during the tragic last week, taking his mother back with him to Bethsaida after the crucifixion. While awaiting Jesus and the apostles, David stopped with Lazarus at Bethany and became tremendously agitated by the manner in which the Pharisees had begun to persecute and harass him since his resurrection. Andrew had directed David to discontinue the messenger service, and this was construed by all as an indication of the early establishment of the kingdom at Jerusalem. David found himself without a job, and he had about decided to become the self-appointed defender of Lazarus, when presently the object of his indignant solicitude fled in haste to Philadelphia. Accordingly, some time after the resurrection and also after the death of his mother, David betook himself to Philadelphia, having first assisted Martha and Mary in disposing of their real estate, and there, in association with Abner and Lazarus, he spent the remainder of his life, becoming the financial overseer of all those large interests of the kingdom which had their center at Philadelphia during the lifetime of Abner.
Okay, so, David tried to help Lazarus, but of course, Lazarus just decided he wasn't going to have any more of it, and he ran off to Philadelphia. It's because the Pharisees were just so intent and had such malicious intent towards him. So he had to get out. And David finally began to understand that. He helped Martha and Mary get rid of the place in Bethany after Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. And they went off to Philadelphia in order to build up the kingdom there. And that's how it played out there. But isn't it interesting that as David did these things, others thought, well, this is one more example of Christ getting ready to take the authority of the kingdom of man upon him in Jerusalem. So we do the same thing. They were looking for Christ even as Jerusalem was being destroyed by the Romans in AD 70. We're looking for Christ even now. Stop looking for Christ as like a deliverer from evil, and instead recognize that he will save our souls from evil if we trust in him and look to him always. He is the Redeemer and Savior of our souls, first and foremost.
Within a short time after the destruction of Jerusalem, Antioch became the headquarters of Pauline Christianity, while Philadelphia remained the center of the Abnerian kingdom of heaven. From Antioch, the Pauline version of the teachings of Jesus and about Jesus spread to all the Western world. From Philadelphia, the missionaries of the Abnerian version of the kingdom of heaven spread throughout Mesopotamia and Arabia until the later times when these uncompromising emissaries of the teachings of Jesus were overwhelmed by the sudden rise of Islam.
Okay. If you know me, you know that I have no tolerance for Islam, because the Lord taught us that by their fruits ye shall know them. And by the fruits of Islam, either they are, number one, completely controlled by Caligostia for his purposes to create a check against Christianity, or number two, created by Caligostia as a check against Christianity. That's just by their fruits and what they've done. So what's happened is Caligostia saw an opportunity to squelch a certain aspect of the kingdom of heaven. Remember, there was the Paul's aspect of Christianity, or the Pauline Christianity, of that over control of the church through the apostles, that perspective of, you know, his teachings to help the people govern themselves, but at the same time that church aspect, and that's influenced every church since. That Paul's aspect of what Christianity should be, while Abner's aspect or perspective of Christianity was more a spiritual aspect of the kingdom of heaven, to be missionaries to the world, to go out and teach people the spiritual ideals that Christ taught them in order for them to live their lives as they feel Christ is calling them to. That emissary, that discipleship, that perspective of spirituality first. Now, that, as you can see, one is more closer aligned to what Christ desired than the other. And that was the one that was wholly targeted by Islam because of where they resided. But it still exists in the church. You still have that over control aspect of the church and leadership of the church, and these organizations that govern people's lives, and then that spirituality aspect of the church. If you see anything, there's that two layers to Christianity, and still exists. But one won out over the other primarily because the other one was stamped out by Islam, as I see it. Let's move on.
2. On counting the cost. When Jesus and the company of almost 1,000 followers arrived at the Bethany ford of the Jordan, sometimes called Bethabara, his disciples began to realize that he was not going directly to Jerusalem. While they hesitated and debated among themselves, Jesus climbed upon a huge stone and delivered that discourse which has become known as counting the cost. The Master said, "You who would follow after me from this time on must be willing to pay the price of whole-hearted dedication to the doing of my Father's will. If you would be my disciples, you must be willing to forsake father, mother, wife, children, brothers, and sisters. If any one of you would now be my disciple, you must be willing to give up even your life, just as the Son of Man is about to offer up his life for the completion of the mission of doing the Father's will on earth and in the flesh. If you are not willing to pay the full price, you can hardly be my disciple. Before you go further, you should each sit down and count the cost of being my disciple. Which one of you would undertake to build a watchtower on your lands without first sitting down to count up the cost, to see whether you had money enough to complete it? If you fail thus to reckon the cost, after you have laid the foundation, you may discover that you are unable to finish that which you have begun, and therefore will all your neighbors mock you, saying, 'Behold, this man began to build, but was unable to finish his work.' Again, what king, when he prepares to make war upon another king, does not first sit down and take counsel as to whether he will be able, with 10,000 men, to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? If the king cannot afford to meet his enemy because he is unprepared, he sends an embassy to this other king, even when he is yet a great way off, asking for terms of peace. Now then, must each of you sit down and count the cost of being my disciple. From now on you will not be able to follow after us, listening to the teaching and beholding the works. You will be required to face bitter persecutions and to bear witness for this gospel in the face of crushing disappointment. If you are unwilling to renounce all that you are and to dedicate all that you have, then are you unworthy to be my disciple. If you have already conquered yourself within your own heart, you need have no fear of that outward victory which you must presently gain when the Son of Man is rejected by the chief priests and the Sadducees and is given into the hands of mocking unbelievers.
Okay. So every Christian must get to that point where they have a decision to make. Will I trust the Lord no matter what the cost? Will I follow him no matter what he asks of me? And it's not about forsaking family, forsaking loved ones, forsaking responsibilities. That's not what it's about. The Lord wants you to take responsibilities and fulfill them. But are you willing to lay it all at his feet? Are you willing to give it all? So if he calls you to go and do, you will go and do. That doesn't mean you can't be saved if you're not committed to that. It's not it. It's just at some point, in order to receive eternal life, you must trust the Lord completely. We have 7 mansion worlds to get us to that point where we can finally get to the point where we trust the Lord completely and we will do his will no matter what. But we can reach that in this life. If we make this commitment that we will do his will and seek for his will, seek for the Father's will in our life, he will give us opportunities to be tested on that. Instead of dotting the I's and crossing the T's and being careful around others so that we fit according to their perspectives of what we should be, we're willing to say, I will do what the Lord wants me to do no matter what. Not to offend others, but because that's what He's called me to do. That is a commitment that all Christians must make, either in this life or in the life to come. We'll stop right there now for today and continue on tomorrow.